And we'll talk here about the Supreme Court, which is deciding in a case called Grant Pass v. Johnson. They heard oral arguments yesterday. They're deciding whether this city in Oregon, Grants Pass, which is roughly 40,000 people, there's no homeless shelter in the city in Southern Oregon. They're deciding whether or not to uphold this ban on people basically being unhoused. And I'm not exaggerating there. It makes it a civil violation to sleep outdoors. And this is the definition of criminalizing poverty and putting people in a cycle of poverty, because it's not free, FYI, to have dealings with the criminal justice system, especially with civil penalties.
And let's just remind everyone that the political class is owned by real estate, who are actually the culprits for why people are homeless in this country.
It's housing shortages, right? And so where are people going to sleep if they don't have a home? They may sleep in a park. They may sleep under a blanket. And at issue in this case is the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment, which I think is apt here. But unfortunately, this Supreme Court has gutted the Eighth Amendment for quite a while. And Clarence Thomas in particular has shown a deep love for things like capital punishment. But this happened a few years, this case, after there was already some litigation surrounding homelessness in the Ninth Circuit, which encompasses California and Oregon. In Martin versus City of Boise in 2019, the Circuit Court of Appeals there did not allow to criminalize camping law for homeless residents. And they basically said that some of those ordinances could not be enforced. And the Supreme Court, after that, declined to review the decision. And that's where the law basically stood up until this point, when the Supreme Court decided to take this case up. So the liberal justices were immensely skeptical, as was Amy Coney Barrett a little bit, which gives us a glimmer of hope. But you need more than one conservative based on this construction of the Supreme Court, and I'm not sure they're going to be able to get somebody. Regardless, here is Sotomayor in oral arguments yesterday expressing that skepticism, questioning the attorney for Grants Pass, Theane Evangelis. Theane, I don't know how to say her name, but this is what Sotomayor was asking about.
Assuming it's there, it prohibits you criminalizing homelessness, right? So what you do is say only homeless people who sleep outdoors will be arrested. That's the testimony of your chief of police, two or three officers, which is, if you read the crime, it's only stopping you from sleeping in public if you, for the purpose of maintaining a temporary place to live. And the police officers testified that that means that if a stargazer wants to take a blanket or a sleeping bag out at night to watch the stars and fall asleep, you don't arrest them. You don't arrest babies who have blankets over them. You don't arrest people who are sleeping on the beach, as I tend to do if I've been there a while. You only arrest people who don't have a second home. Is that correct?
Well,
who don't have a home.
So, no, these laws are generally applicable. They apply to...
Yeah, that's what you want to say. Give me one example, because your police officers couldn't. And they explicitly said, if someone has another home, has a home, and is out there and happens to fall asleep, they won't be arrested. Fall asleep with something on them.
Well, Joint Appendix, page 98, is one example of a citation issued to a person with a home address. But more importantly, I think what we're getting at here is that these laws regulate conduct of everyone. There's nothing in the law that criminalizes homelessness. I really
that's what you say, but if I look at the record and see differently.
Yeah, I mean, she makes a very compelling point there, which is essentially that if you are clearly of a class that has a home and has private property or is a renter, you're like Sotomayor and you take a nap on the beach, that response, or even say you're sunbathing in a public park in the summer and you fall asleep. I've done that. Then Am I going to get arrested in the same way that a person who's showing that they are visibly unhoused would be? Of course not. And the fact that this lawyer was trying to assert that there wasn't a double standard in this instance is ridiculous.
To be coy. They're being coy. I mean, this is a lock up homeless people bill.
It is.
Own it.
Catfish James writes in, small correction on Grants Pass v. Johnson. There is a private homeless shelter there that requires church attendance and labor to use it.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Well,
it requires church attendance? Beautiful.
That's why I didn't really include it, because it's also categorized as a religious, quote, transitional housing program. I wouldn't categorize that as a shelter, to be honest with you.
I mean, George Orwell wrote he did Down and Out in Paris and London, where he went around as he called it at the time, a tramp, and went through the humiliation that unhoused people go through in religious contexts, needing to like put up with just bullshit to get fed.
Well, I mean, right, exactly. It's you have to show fealty to the religion. You have to basically be docile, and that's not a way to treat a human being. I mean, it's humiliating, and that's the kind of thing that and there's also all these hoops to jump through and requirements often for testing that first the number one thing we need to be focused on is alleviating the exacerbating factor here, which is being unhoused, contributing to mental health episodes tangibly as well as active addiction, and then you can work on those issues and getting people back up on their feet. But Mark Joseph Stern, as always, has a great write-up in Slate and explains further what the Supreme Court is looking at here. Since 2018, the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals has held that the Constitution prohibits the prosecution of indigent people who sleep in public places when there is no available shelter space. That's the case that I referenced earlier in the Ninth Circuit. Yes, the Ninth Circuit. Grants Pass gives the Supreme Court an opportunity to overturn that rule and in the process roll back long-standing limitations on cruel and unusual punishment. A majority of the court seemed inclined to do so based in part on a suspicion that the Ninth Circuit somehow is exacerbating homelessness. Which, by the way, the implicit argument here, this is me editorializing, is that it's incentivizing it? Oh, because you say people can sleep in public under a blanket, they're going to all want to.
This is money, too, to prison systems.
Yes. Yes. And Mark says, let's be clear, it isn't. And abolishing the Ninth Circuit's narrow ruling will do nothing to help people who lack housing or the communities in which they reside. The appeals court decision was rooted in the 1962 Supreme Court case called Robinson v. California. In Robinson, the High Court struck down a California law that criminalized addiction to narcotics. The disease of addiction, the majority reason, constituted a status that the government may not penalize under the 8th and 14th Amendments, which prescribe states from imposing cruel and unusual punishments. The act of using narcotics could, of course, be prosecuted, but a person's mere condition as a drug addict could not. Based on this precedent, the Ninth Circuit ruled that homelessness, like addiction, is a status that Grants Pass could not lawfully punish. And sleep, far beyond being a voluntary act like narcotics use, is a basic human need that unhoused people literally cannot live without. So there's the second layer there that should undergird this reasoning and basically say that Robinson applies and that the Ninth Circuit ruling should stand, because sleeping is not in the same legal status as narcotics use, which is illegal. But addiction's not illegal. Homelessness is not illegal. The second standard beneath that should also, again, make this case stronger. But that's not seemingly what the conservative justices are alluding to. Advocates for homeless people were alarmed when the Supreme Court agreed to review the appeals court's decision, given the conservative majority's extreme hostility towards the Eighth Amendment. SCOTUS has torn down pretty much every safeguard against cruel and unusual punishment that it has come across, eviscerating the principle that the amendment enshrines evolving standards of decency into constitutional law. The real question in Grants Pass, then, is not whether the Supreme Court will side with the town. It will. This is what Mark says. The question is how much damage it will do to the Eighth Amendment along the way. So Elena Kagan, Supreme Court Justice, also made the case that I was just making in oral arguments about how sleeping is not something that's voluntary or an action that you can take that should be deemed a criminal activity. But to bring it back to what I said before, this is a way to further push people in a cycle of poverty and into the prison industrial complex where they're going to have to pay fines over and over again for their own poverty and the conditions that society has set for them.
And yeah, I mean, I think Luke O'Neill's talked about this with regards to like police locking up people in Chicago. Like if you lock up somebody from downtown Chicago and they are transported to like a suburban containment facility, prison, that not only means money to that facility and not basically for caging a human, but also counts for them on the census. And I imagine this would probably play the exact same way. That okay, we get we sort out all the developers who want the police to remove homeless people. We get more money for prisons and count it towards the suburbs on the sentence. This is all part of the system.